Welcome to my Neon Tetra watercolour tutorial. This tutorial is for my colouring club members. If you want to join my colouring club, visit my website kobeannmore.com. I will send you a new design every month for you to paint, along with a paint palette and a link to my YouTube tutorial. All you will need is 2 paintbrushes and 2 water dishes. As always, you don't have to follow my YouTube tutorial. If you want to choose your own colour scheme, I highly encourage you. For this tutorial, we are going to use red and blue to paint these little fish. So if you've received your colour in design and your paint palette, let's get started. If you have been following along with my Paint With Me tutorials, you know that I like to paint using layers. So what I'm going to do is paint these little fish blue, and then later on we are going to add some red to create some depth and shading. So these little fish that I have drawn in this design are called Neon Tetras, and they have a very distinctive colour scheme. They have a bright blue stripe that goes all the way down their back, and then a bright red section that comes in from the tail. If you're not familiar with this type of fish, here is a picture of one for your reference. So what we are going to do is paint the entire top of the fish with blue paint. So this is the space above the stripe and the stripe. I also painted the top of the eyelid as well. When it comes to the space below the blue line, we are going to add a small amount of blue pigment around the face and around the tail area, but we want to keep the belly white. And also leave the bottom of the eye white as well. So as you can see here, I am using a very, very light shade of blue, which is done by using a very small amount of pigment and a lot of water. I then added a little bit more pigment to my brush to make the stripe of the fish a slightly darker shade of blue. But at this stage of the painting, we do want to make sure we are keeping these colours nice and light. Phthalo blue at its richest pigment is quite a dark royal blue. So for the fish, we want to use only a small amount of pigment so that we can keep that bright neon blue shade. We are also going to add some blue to the fins and the tail. Again, only using a very small amount of pigment and a lot of water. Then repeat this process for all of the fish, using a small amount of blue pigment, painting above the blue line, the top of the eyelid, slightly below the blue line, all of the fins and the tail. In step 2, we are going to be adding red to the painting. This time we are going to use a lot of pigment and a little bit of water, because we want a very vibrant red in the section towards the end of the tail. If you're finding that the red is not vibrant enough for your liking, you can always add a second layer to make it a little bit more vibrant. Just keep adding more and more pigment until you're happy with the result. And then repeat this until you have painted all of the tail end of the fish red. We are then going to continue adding red pigment, but this time we want to use a very, very light shade of red. So on your paint palette, get a very small amount of the red pigment and add a lot of water until you get a very, very light shade of red. We are then going to use this pale red pigment to paint above and below the blue line on the fish's back. It will mix with the blue pigment and create a very light shade of purple. Make sure you're not adding any pigment inside the stripe, because we want to keep that area a vibrant blue. You can also add light red pigment to the fins and the tail of the fish so that they are also a light shade of purple. If you find at this stage that you didn't add enough blue when you were painting the blue layer, You can always add more blue pigment. That's the good thing about keeping your painting light in the beginning, is that you can keep adding layers to make it darker. As you can see here, I'm adding a little bit more blue pigment to the tops of the fish and the stripe of the fish, because I found when the paint had dried, it was just a little bit too light, and I really wanted that vibrant neon blue color for the stripe. So now that the base color is a little bit darker blue, when I add the light red pigment, it turns to a very nice shade of purple. So paint all of the tops of the fish with the light red pigment, making sure not to get any red pigment into the stripe, but we do want to add a small amount of red pigment below the line and into the fins and tail. So repeat this process with the red pigment until you have painted all of the fish. And also, one thing that I forgot to mention earlier, you need to paint inside of the fish's mouths with a very dark shade of orange pigment, which will help you be ready for the next step. So now we are going to come back with some blue pigment to add some shading to the outer edge of the fish. So in the orange tail area of the fish, we want to add some blue pigment to the bottom and the top of this shape, but not the edge that is towards the center of the body. We are also going to add a lot of darker blue pigment inside the fish's mouths, so that area is a very dark shade of purple. Only 2 of the fish have their mouths open, so you only have to do this for 2 of the fish. Once you have finished doing all of the blue shading for all of the fish, we can move on to painting the background. So if you have been following along with my underwater sea creatures series, you know that we have done 2 different styles of background. For the seahorse design, we painted the shapes solid blue. And for the angelfish design, we made an abstract line pattern that followed the shapes of the background. This time I wanted to experiment a little bit with cross-hatching. So inside each of the background shapes, I am painting very, very thin lines in one direction and then repeating the process in the opposite direction to create a cross-hatching effect. I then repeated this process for all of the shapes in the background. I tried to change the angle of the lines for each shape so that each shape has its own pattern and doesn't blend into the one next door. So what I am doing here is adding a very light blue wash all over the background, covering all of the white lines and all of the cross-hatching so that it sort of blends a little bit more together and creates a nice watery background effect. Before you start this step, make sure your cross-hatching is already dry. When you add the wash on top of your cross-hatching, even when it is dry, it will bleed a little bit, but if your cross-hatching is still completely wet, you will lose your cross-hatching pattern altogether. Also, don't worry about getting too close to the fish at this stage. We will come back in later and paint in close to the edges of the fish. At this stage, we're just adding a light blue wash to cover the background. In this step, we are going to paint all the way around the edge of the border using the blue pigment. We are going to use a lot of blue pigment and a little bit of water. This way we'll get a very, very dark and vibrant blue. And if you have a cat, at this point of the tutorial, your cat will knock over your water, so you'll need to take a quick break to clean that up. Just kidding, but that is what I had to do because Charlie knocked over my water, causing a huge mess. Okay, back to painting the border. So we're going to paint all the way around the edge with as much pigment as we can. But don't worry if you find it's not dark enough. You can add a second layer of pigment over the top of this one. And even if you want it darker than that, you can keep adding layers until you get the color that you like. So as a final touch, what we're going to do is come and paint in close around the fish to really make them pop out of the artwork. So at this stage, we can fill in any white spaces that might have been left around the fish with a light blue wash. And then we are going to use a lot of dark blue pigment to paint a really fine line all the way around the edge, and then blend that out towards the background so that you have a dark outline all the way around the fish, making the fish really pop out from the background. So once you have painted all the way around the outlines of all of the fish, including these two fish that actually touch so that you can get some depth between them, then you have completed your artwork. As always, I would love to see your final results. You can share them with me on Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok. My tag is @KobeAndMore. Or you can also leave a review on my website, kobeandmore.com, and you can upload a picture there too. Thank you for being a Colouring Club member.